Hi, I'm David. Welcome to A Tale. Once a week on this channel, we tell a true story from history, the kind I stay up too late reading about, told slow enough to fall asleep to. Tonight it is the story of Harriet Tubman, who freed herself from slavery by walking north through the dark, and then turned around and went back for everyone else. And I will tell you right at the start that this story ends gently. She made it every single time. She never lost a soul in her care, and she died an old free woman, past 90, in her own bed, with her people around her. Everything you will hear is drawn from the records and from the historians who have spent their lives testing the legends, and the sources are listed below. There are no ads waiting to wake you, so settle in, get warm, and let an old story keep you company. Good night. Close your eyes now, if you like. This is a story, and it is true, and it asks nothing of you, except that you lie still and let it happen. And before we begin it, let me give you the ending, so that you can hold it the whole way through, the way you hold a rail on a dark stair. Tonight the ending is one of the good ones. There was once a woman, barely 5 feet tall, who could not read a word of any book, and who became one of the greatest guides in the history of the world. She was born enslaved on the marshy eastern shore of Maryland, and one autumn night in 1849, when she was about 27, she walked away north, alone, following the North Star, some 90 miles through woods and fields, and along a slow, dark river, until she crossed into Pennsylvania and was free. And then she did the thing that made her immortal. She went back into the very country she had escaped, where her face was known and her freedom was forfeit. She went back again and again, about 13 times over 10 years, by night in winter, and led out her brothers and her parents and her nieces and nephews and strangers who had only heard that there was a woman who could do this. About 70 people all told, and she never lost a single one. The people she led called her Moses, and the men who hunted Moses never once worked out who she was. When a great war came, she went south with the army, and served as a nurse and a scout and a spy. And one June night, she helped guide 2 little steamers up a southern river, and by morning more than 700 people had walked out of bondage at once. And when the war was over, she went home to a white frame house with apple trees in the town of Auburn, New York, and grew old there among people who loved her, and gave away nearly everything she had, and died in her own bed in the spring of 1913, past 90, free, with her family and friends around her, singing. So hold that. Nothing in this story can take her from you. Every road in it, every frozen marsh and dark crossing, runs safe to that white house among the apple trees in the end. You know the harbor. The ship comes home every single time, and the last time it comes home, full of years, and honored and at peace. And one thing more, because it is the reason this story, of all stories, belongs to bedtime. Every great thing this woman ever did, she did at night. Daylight belonged to the people who hunted her. The dark belonged to her. It hid her, carried her, kept her secrets, and set her people free. The night sky was her map, and one quiet star in it was her compass. She is the best friend the dark ever had. So as you drift tonight, remember that the darkness gathering softly around your bed is the very element she trusted most. Let it hold you the way it held her. It knows how. Let the story take its time now. It has 90 years to cross, and it is in no hurry, and neither are you. She was born around the beginning of 1822, and we know the season, or close to it, because of one small line in a plantation account book, a payment to a midwife, made in March of that year. That is how quietly one of the great lives of the 19th century begins. A midwife's fee in a ledger on the eastern shore of Maryland. Let yourself see that country, because she carried it in her body all her life, the way sailors carry the sea. The eastern shore is low, flat, watery land, half earth and half tide, where slow rivers with soft names, the Choptank, the Blackwater, wander through marshes wider than towns. Pine woods stand in dark islands among the fields, and at night, with no hills to hide it, the whole turning wheel of the stars hangs over that flat country like a lamp brought close to a page. Her name, at first, was Araminta Ross. Minty, they called her. Her mother was Harriet, called Rit, who cooked in the big house. Her father was Ben Ross, who worked the timber. There were 9 children, and Minty came somewhere in the middle. Her grandmother Modesty had come across the ocean from Africa, and it was said the family line ran back to the Ashanti people. They were enslaved, which means the law counted them as property, the way it counted the mules and the timber. The family never for 1 hour agreed to the law's arithmetic, and that disagreement, quiet and total, is the seed of this whole story. Minty was put to work very young, hired out to other households, sent as a small girl to wade the winter marshes, checking muskrat traps, even when she was ill, and set to rock a cradle in a house where she was punished when the baby cried. We will not paint those punishments. Know only that she carried their marks all her life, and spoke of them in her old age, plainly and without fear, the way old sailors speak of storms long outrun. And know one warm thing about that family. When Minty was still a girl, a trader came into the district wanting to buy her little brother Moses, and her mother simply refused to let it happen. Rit hid the boy for a solid month, and when the men finally came to her cabin door, she stood in it and made it understood, in words the whole quarter remembered, that they would not have him. And they did not have him. Minty saw that and remembered everything, always. Long before anyone called her Moses, there was a boy named Moses who never went south because a woman made a doorway of herself and would not move. That woman was her mother. Then came the day at the store, which changed her life twice over. She was about 12, on an errand at the village store in Bucktown, when an overseer, cornering a boy who had left his work, snatched a 2-pound iron weight from the counter and threw it. He was not throwing it at her. It found her anyway, standing in the doorway, and struck her head, and she nearly died of it. There was no doctor for a girl like Minty. They laid her on a bench by the loom and let her live or not, and she lived. For the rest of her life, out of that injury, sleep came for her strangely. Sudden spells that dropped over her like a curtain, in the middle of work, in the middle of a sentence, a few minutes at a time, and then she would wake and continue exactly where she had left off. Doctors now would call it a seizure disorder from the blow. She called it something else, for with the spells came dreams and visions, vivid as daylight, and she trusted them absolutely as messages from God. You and I do not have to settle tonight what they were. History records only what everyone who traveled with her agreed, that she trusted her visions the way a pilot trusts a chart, and that the chart, again and again, proved true. The girl grew and grew strong, too strong in the end for parlor work, so they sent her to the fields and the forests, and this, though nobody intended it, was the making of her. She drove oxen. She plowed. In time she was hired into the timber crews along the rivers. where her father Ben was a foreman, so respected that his word settled arguments, and Ben Ross taught his daughter the woods, how to move through them quietly, and how to read them, which side of a tree the moss favors, what the birds tell you at dusk, which plants feed you, which roots heal, and he taught her the sky, the one map nobody could take from her, the 2 stars at the front lip of the drinking gourd, the constellation you may call the Big Dipper. Point always to the North Star, and the North Star does not wander, does not set, and does not lie. Hold on to that star. The whole middle of the story hangs from it. The timber connected her to something larger, too. The wood went out by water, and the free black sailors and boatmen who moved it carried more than lumber. They carried news, who had gone, who had made it, names of towns and rivers, the shape of the land between here and freedom. None of it was written down, because writing could hang a man. And Minty, listening among the woodpiles, was quietly memorizing a country she'd never seen. Around 1844, when she was about 22, she married a free black man named John Tubman. Freedom and slavery lived strangely close on the eastern shore, where by mid-century, about half the black people were free, and one family, one marriage, could stand on both sides of the line at once. Around that time, she set aside Minty, took her mother's name, and became Harriet Tubman, the name the world would keep. She was already thinking hard about the line between slave and free, and here's the proof, one of my favorite small facts about her. She saved up $5, a serious sum for a woman who owned nothing, and paid it to a lawyer to look up an old will. The lawyer told her what she had suspected. By its terms, her mother should have been freed years before, at 45, and the family that held her had simply ignored it, and the law had let them. A woman who would not read had hired the law to read for her, and the law's answer was that the law would not help. She never forgot it. Paper was not going to free her family. Feet might. Then came the spring of 1849. The man who held legal title to her, Edward Brodess, died in March with his debts unpaid, and everyone in the quarter knew what that meant. People would be sold to settle the accounts, and sold south into the cotton country from which nobody came back. Harriet knew that grief already. Years before, wagons had gone south carrying 3 of her own sisters, sold away, and the family never heard of them again all their lives. That was what the word South meant in that house. And now the whisper ran through the cabins that it was coming again, and that Harriet and her brothers might be first. She made up her mind that autumn. She would not wait to be carried south. She had reasoned it out in her mind. She said later to the woman who wrote her words down that she had a right to one of 2 things, liberty or death, and if she could not have one, she would have the other. Hold that sentence gently. It sounds fierce, but listen to what it actually is. It is a woman declaring that her own life belongs to her. On that declaration, everything that follows was built. She tried it first in September with 2 of her brothers, Ben and Harry, and the first try failed softly, the way first tries do. The brothers lost their nerve and turned back, and she would not leave them out there alone, so she came back too. We know the very month because a notice offering a reward for the 3 of them was posted in the Cambridge newspaper, and it survives, with her name in it, Minty, aged about 27. The paper printed to hunt her is now one of the treasures historians use to tell her story truly. There's a lesson in that, somewhere, about who wins in the end. A few weeks later she went again, alone. She could not say goodbye. A goodbye was a confession that could be forced out of anyone. So she did what she would do all her life. She sang it. Walking slowly past the cabin of a friend at dusk, as if on an errand, she sang an old hymn about meeting in the morning, bound for the promised land. And the friend heard it and understood and kept it. And that hymn drifting past the doorway was the whole farewell of one of the great departures in American history. Now come the 90 miles, and I want you to walk them with her slowly, because this is the heart of the night, and there is no hurry in it. She traveled as she would always travel afterward, by night, resting hidden through the day. The North Star hung ahead of her, and when clouds took the sky, she read the moss on the trees with her fingers, her father's lesson, and kept north by touch. She followed the chop tank up through the flat country, because a river is a road that cannot lose you. Follow it against its current, and it must hand you, in the end, to its beginning, further north, closer to free ground. She waded the cold feeder streams, because water keeps no footprints. Fields, woodlots, sleeping farms, a dog barking far off, and stillness until it stopped. And above everything, always, that one fixed star. She had help, and here the famous secret comes softly into our story. There was in those years a thing people called the Underground Railroad, and it was not underground, and it was not a railroad, it was people. A scattered, whispering web of them, black and white, free and enslaved, who passed travelers north from one trusted house to the next, the way buckets pass along a line of hands, and borrowed the language of the new railroads for their code. Safe houses were stations, guides were conductors, the travelers were passengers. Her first helper, the story goes, was a white neighbor woman who gave her a scrap of paper with 2 names on it, the first 2 beads on a string of trust that reached, kitchen by kitchen, 100 miles north. At one of those first stations, the woman of the house handed her a broom and set her sweeping the yard in plain sight of the road, because nobody looks twice at a black woman sweeping a yard. And that morning of hiding in the open taught her more about her future craft, perhaps, than the star itself. So she moved, night by night, up the spine of Delaware, through little towns whose names ran like beads through travelers' memory: Camden, Dover, Smyrna, Blackbird. And Delaware was slave ground too, every mile of it, right up to the line. And then one morning, in the autumn of 1849, she crossed that line, walking into Pennsylvania, into freedom. Years later, she described that moment to the woman who wrote her story down, and her words have never been improved on. She said she looked at her hands to see if she was the same person. Now she was free. And she said there was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and she felt like she was in heaven. A woman looking at her own 2 hands in the sunrise, checking whether freedom had changed them. That is the picture. Keep it somewhere safe. But the memory has a second half, and it is why this is a tale and not just an escape story. She was free, she said, but there was no one to welcome her to the land of freedom. She was a stranger in a strange land. Her home, after all, was down in the old country of Maryland, because her father and mother, her brothers and sisters and friends were there. And then she said the sentence on which her whole life turned. She was free, and they should be free. She went to Philadelphia, the first great free city she had ever seen, and set about the unglamorous, magnificent business of wages. She cooked and scrubbed in kitchens and hotels, and in the summer she worked in the resort town of Cape May, and every coin she did not strictly need, she saved. Nobody knew it yet, but a rescue fund was assembling itself, dollar by dollar, in the pocket of a hotel cook, and the quietest counterattack in the history of American slavery was about to begin. In Philadelphia, there was an office, and in the office there was a ledger, and both belonged to a calm, exact man named William Still, a free black clerk of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. Nearly everyone who came up out of the Chesapeake country passed, sooner or later, through his lamplight, and Still did a thing so dangerous and so precious that it still makes historians catch their breath. He wrote it down. Names, dates, home places, the families travelers hoped to find. He kept the pages hidden, for any one of them could have destroyed lives, and after the war he published them as a great book, which is a large part of how we know that the stories in this tale truly happened. Once, as he interviewed a newly arrived traveler, the questions folded in on themselves, and the man across the desk turned out to be his own brother, left behind decades before, walked into the one office in America where his family's clerk sat waiting. Memory, written down at mortal risk, is why this story has names in it. Harriet's freedom was a year old when the ground shifted under it. In 1850, Congress passed a new Fugitive Slave Act, and the law reached north across the line she had crossed. Escapees could now be hunted in the free state themselves. No one who had fled was safe short of Canada. She took the news the way she took everything, as terrain. Very well. The trains of the secret railroad would simply run further, past the border, to Queen Victoria's ground, where no slave catcher had any power, to the little town of St. Catharines, which was about to become her winter capital. And then, in December of 1850, came the word that started it all. Her own niece, Keziah, down in Cambridge, Maryland, was to be sold, with her 2 little children, at auction in front of the courthouse. What happened next is one of the finest quiet capers in American history, and every bone of it is documented. Keziah's husband was a free black man named John Bowley, a ship's carpenter, steady as his trade. On the appointed day, the auctioneer put Keziah and the children up for sale before the courthouse, and the bidding ran, and the winning bid was made, and the auctioneer went off to his dinner. And when he came back and called for payment, no one stepped forward, and the property was gone. The winning bidder had been John Bowley himself, a man with no money at all, bidding calmly for his own wife. And in the pause his boldness bought, the family had walked away and vanished into a safe house 5 minutes from the courthouse steps. That night, John Bowley put his wife and children into a log canoe and sailed them out onto the open Chesapeake, 60 miles of December water, in an open boat, 1 lantern, steering for the lights of Baltimore. And waiting in Baltimore, come down from Philadelphia on her first mission, was Harriet, who hid them and moved them north, station to station, safe to Philadelphia. Note what her first rescue already shows. The plan audacious, the execution calm, the family doing the daring and Harriet being the road, and it worked completely, and nobody was lost. It would go on working in exactly that style for 10 years. A few months later, she went down herself into Maryland and brought out her brother Moses and 2 other men. And late that same year, she made the journey that settled who she was going to be. She went back for her husband. She saved for months, bought him a good suit of clothes, and traveled down into the old neighborhood where her face was known, and sent word to John Tubman that his wife was come to bring him north. and word came back that John had taken another wife and was content and would not come. She stood in the dark within a mile or two of him, the story goes, and thought about marching in and making a scene worthy of the occasion. And then, as she told it afterward, she simply dropped him out of her heart. And here's why this evening keeps that painful little scene. She did not turn for home. The road was open, and the suit of clothes would fit somebody. So she gathered a group of strangers who wanted to go north and took them instead. And the private errand became a calling, and the conductor was born. Now let me show you how it was done, because the craft of it, patient, exact, and almost entirely gentle, is the loveliest part of the whole story. She could not read a map. She did not need one. She was one. She went in winter, when the nights were long and the roads were empty, when respectable people kept to their firesides. The days were for hiding, in barns, in root cellars, in the woods she knew like her own hands. The nights were for walking. She liked to begin on a Saturday night, and the reason is so simple and so clever that people have been smiling at it for 150 years. No newspapers were printed on Sunday. A party that slipped away after dark on Saturday could not be advertised until Monday morning. The descriptions and the rewards had to wait for the presses, and by the time the ink was dry, her passengers were 2 nights gone. She had been hunted by newsprint once herself, remember. She had studied the enemy's clock, and she made the Sabbath itself a station on her railroad. She carried songs the way other travelers carry lanterns. Standing in the dark outside a cabin, she would sing, softly, an old hymn every soul inside knew, about going down, Moses, way down into Egypt's land, to tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And the people inside heard and knew that Moses was in the yard and that the hour had come. Sung one way, a verse meant all clear. Sung another way, it meant wait, not tonight. The whole countryside heard enslaved people singing about Moses and Pharaoh and took it for religion. It was the timetable. She was a master of the hardest disguise of all, which is ordinariness. A small, plain, work-worn woman moving at a country woman's pace. Nothing to see. Once she saw coming down the road a man who had known her for years, with no ditch to take and no time to take it, and she happened to be carrying 2 live chickens. So she slipped their string and set them flapping loose, and became instantly a flustered old woman, chasing her supper through the dust, bent double under her bonnet, and the man rode past laughing, and never saw her face at all. Another time, sitting bolt upright in a railway carriage in slave country, with notices out for her, she reached for the one shield nobody would connect with Minty Ross. She took up a book and held it open, and appeared to read. A man studied her and moved on. The woman they wanted, everyone knew, could not read. Telling it afterward, laughing, she said she only hoped she had been holding the book right side up. She thought of everything, because everything was hers to think of. Baby slept the journey through, dosed gently with paregoric, the druggist's soothing syrup of that century, and carried warm in a shawl. Passengers whose courage failed on the 3rd cold night met a Moses suddenly harder than the weather, because one returner, questioned, could unravel the whole line, every safe house, every name. She carried a pistol, and old stories say she let a faltering man see it once or twice, with a few words to the effect that on this railroad there was no going back. The stories may have grown in the telling. What is certain is the result. No passenger of hers ever turned back, and no station on her line was ever betrayed. Even her affliction bowed to the work. Some nights, in the middle of a march, the old curtain from Bucktown would drop over her without warning, and she would sleep where she sat, minutes only. Her passengers crouched around her in the dark, hardly breathing, and then she would wake and stand and say which way, and it was always the right way. They came to believe God whispered to her in those small sleeps, and they, you will notice, all lived to say so. Down in Wilmington, at the last and most dangerous crossing before free soil, sat her great friend, a tall old Quaker iron merchant named Thomas Garrett, station master of that whole frontier. Years before Harriet came to him, a court had fined Garrett nearly everything he had for helping travelers, and the old man stood up in the courtroom, ruined, and told the judge that if anyone knew of a fugitive who needed a friend, they should send them to Thomas Garrett. He meant it, and the whole Chesapeake knew it. He hid her passengers among his hardware, moved them over the bridges in bricklayers' wagons, and, his own favorite ritual, bought every weary traveler a pair of new shoes, Harriet included, more than once. His letters survive, counting her comings and goings in his careful hand. When a Quaker businessman, who has seen 1,000 escapes, calls one small woman the most remarkable person he has ever met, history is entitled to take notes. And so, season by season, the legend grew in the Tidewater country. Someone was getting people out, whole families at a time, gone between a Saturday dusk and a Monday paper. The planters called the thief Moses and argued about who he might be, a white abolitionist from the north. Some said, a big cunning man, and rewards were posted for the runaways she guided, and patrols rode the road she walked. And it never once occurred to the hunters, in 10 years, that Moses was a 5-foot-tall woman who fell asleep in the middle of sentences and could not read the notices they printed. She hid inside their assumptions, safe as a star behind clouds. In later years, a well-meaning writer guessed her numbers high, and the guess became the legend. 300 people, 19 journeys. The historians who live in the records find the truth to be about 70 people, over about 13 journeys, with careful directions given besides to dozens more who found their own way north. Hold the true number. 70 human beings, name by name, family by family, each one walked out of bondage through 100 miles of hostile dark by one woman without one single loss. The legend says 300, as if 70 were not enough. The truth needs no inflation. Nobody else did what she did. Nobody came close. Of all her journeys, the one people loved best happened at Christmas in 1854, and it begins with a letter that could not say what it meant. Word had reached her that 3 of her brothers, Robert and Ben and Henry, were to be sold soon, likely just after Christmas, when the year's accounts were settled. She could not write, and any letter south would be read by suspicious eyes before it reached black hands. So she dictated one to a friend, addressed to a free black man near home named Jacob Jackson, a letter that chattered about family matters, then asked Jacob to tell my brothers to be always watching unto prayer, and when the good old ship of Zion comes along, to be ready to step on board. The postmaster, certain it meant something, turned it over and over, and finally handed it to Jacob, who read it once, with the officials watching his face, and shrugged, and said it could not be meant for him at all. And then he went straight out and sent word to the Ross brothers, "Be ready. Your sister is coming for Christmas." She came. The brothers slipped away on Christmas Eve in a hard, cold rain and made for their parents' place at Poplar Neck, where Harriet waited, and there they all hid through Christmas Day in the Fodder house, the little slat-sided barn where the corn was stored, rain ticking on the roof, everyone breathing quiet in the smell of dry corn. And now watch the two old people, because this scene belongs to them. Inside the cabin, a few steps away, their mother Rit had killed a pig and was cooking Christmas dinner for the sons who always came to her at Christmas. They did not dare tell her they were there. Her joy would have been as loud as her grief, and the quarter had ears. So her children lay in the fodder house and watched their mother through the gaps in the boards as she came again and again to her door, shading her eyes, looking down the road for them. That ache, held in silence a few yards from a warm kitchen, is as close to sorrow as this story will come tonight, and I give it to you gently, because it is the price of the gladness that follows. Their father was another matter. Old Ben Ross was certain to be questioned when the young men were missed, and everyone knew Ben Ross did not lie. So Ben solved it, and the solution is the tenderest piece of craft in this whole crafty story. He would not look at them. He came out at dusk with food, and passed it in, and stood talking low with his sons through the boards, a folded kerchief bound over his eyes. And when night fell, and the party moved out for the north road, the old man walked the first miles with them, arm in arm with the son on either side, blindfolded the whole way, so that when the men came with their questions, as they surely did, Ben Ross could lay his hand on his heart and say, in perfect truth, that he had not seen his boys, not at Christmas, not at all. They said goodbye in the dark, by touch and voice alone, a father seeing his children off without seeing them. And the party walked north through the rain, and every one of them reached free ground. The parents' own turn came in 1857, and urgently, word reached Harriet that her father was suspected of helping a party of escapees, and might be arrested within days. Ben and Rit were in their 70s, and could never walk the distance. So their daughter, who improvised the way other people breathe, built them a carriage, an old horse that still had work in it, an axle and a pair of wheels, a board to sit on, a straw collar for harness, and on the night roads at a walking pace, she drove her own mother and father out of bondage, the old horse clopping softly, the old people wrapped warm, the daughter at the wheel, until she could put them on the proper railroad, the iron one, and see them through to Canada. Her mother, the family remembered with a smile, grieved most of the way north for the good household things left behind. She was owed them, and much else. There would be a feather bed waiting in the end, in New York State, and she would die in it, free, at a very great age, in her daughter's house. By the end of the 1850s, the woman called Moses had a home of her own, on free soil, and she owed it, of all people, to a sitting United States Senator. William H. Seward of Auburn, New York, was one of the great anti-slavery voices in Washington, and his wife Frances, steadier still in the cause. Their fine house had long been a station on the road to Canada. In 1859, the Sewards sold Harriet, on the gentlest of terms, a place of her own, a modest house with 7 acres, a barn, and apple trees, on South Street at the edge of town. Under the Fugitive Slave Act, it was a legally reckless thing for a senator to do. Selling a farm to a woman the law still counted as property. He does not seem to have lost a minute's sleep over it. She loved the place on sight, and it anchored the rest of her life. Her old parents came down from the hard Canadian winters, and for 50 years its rooms were full of family, boarders, and worn-out travelers. Here's the road's end, already glowing in the middle distance, a white frame house, apple trees, a barn, a stove, at the quiet edge of a small northern town. Once, passing through the nearby city of Troy in the spring of 1860, she walked into one of the dramatic scenes of the age. A crowd gathered where a young man named Charles Knoll was held, about to be returned south under the law. What exactly she did that day grew for decades in the telling. The sober core is that she was at the front of the crowd that took him out of the building, an unremarkable little woman in a sunbonnet whom the officers never thought to watch until far too late, and that Charles Knoll was hidden, then openly ransomed by the citizens of Troy, and lived out his life a free man. It was her one famous act done in daylight. Even then, nobody saw her coming. In December of 1860, she went south a last time, her 13th journey by the historian's careful count, and brought out a family named Ennals, husband and wife and children, one of them a baby, who slept the icy road north in a basket, gently dosed in the old way. She delivered them safe to Canada as the old year died. She was about 38. She had run her railroad for 10 years, and her train had never once gone off the track, and the great war everyone had felt coming was only months away. When the war came, she went to it. It astonishes people to learn that the woman called Moses served the Union Army in South Carolina for most of the war, in about 5 jobs at once. In the spring of 1862, she sailed south to the captured Sea Islands around Port Royal and Beaufort, South Carolina, low country of rice fields and live oaks and tidal rivers, where thousands of newly freed people were gathering inside the Union lines. She went first as a nurse. Fevers ran through the camps, and she fought them with the pharmacy her father had taught her in the Maryland woods, digging roots at night and boiling a bitter tea, and the accounts say her medicine brought back men the doctors had given up. She would not draw army rations while the freed people went short, so she kept herself by baking pies and gingerbread and brewing root beer in the evenings and selling them about the camps. Picture it and smile, because she would have, the most hunted woman of the 1850s, moving through an army camp at dusk with a tray of pies. But the army had grasped what it had in her, the best night traveler of her generation, trusted at once by the people of the plantations, who told her things they would tell no soldier. Given money from the Secret Service funds, she built a small ring of scouts and river pilots, local black watermen who knew every creek and landing, and, crucially, where the Confederate torpedoes, the mines of that war, lay moored beneath the brown water. And on the night of the 1st of June, 1863, all of it came together on the Combahee River. 3 little steamers slipped out of Beaufort after dark, carrying about 150 black soldiers of the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers, most of them men who had themselves been enslaved on that very coast, under a raiding colonel named James Montgomery. One boat found a sandbar in the first hours, and her men crowded onto the other 2, and the 2 went on. And aboard the lead boat, beside the colonel, stood Harriet Tubman, who had gathered the raid's intelligence and now helped guide its course, her pilot steering clean past the mines whose places her network had charted. As far as anyone has ever found, no American woman before her had planned and helped lead a military operation of that kind. She was the mission's eyes. What happened at dawn along the Combahee was less a battle than a jubilee. The boats whistled at the landings, and the plantations emptied. From the rice fields, where the morning gangs had just gone out, people simply put down their hoes and came, wading the ditches, streaming down to the water, carrying everything they could seize in the one unrepeatable moment: hens, piglets, kettles still steaming. Harriet, telling it afterward, laughed until she shook. A woman striding aboard, with a pot of rice still smoking on her head, twins slung in a bag at her shoulder, pigs squealing under both arms. The rowboats shuttling people out to the steamers were swamped with clinging hands until nothing could move, and the moment tipped toward panic. And Moses did then, on a warship, what she had done at cabin doors for 10 years. She stood up on the deck and sang, verse after verse, out over the water, an old song of welcome and promise, and the crowds on the bank caught it up and shouted glory and loosed the boats, and the shuttling went on. By the time the steamers turned down river, more than 700 people were aboard. 700 in one night, and many of the young men among them stepped almost straight from the rice fields into the uniform of the regiment that had brought them out. A few weeks later, a Boston newspaper, whose editor was her friend, told the story in print and for once put her name to it, where all the world could read it. She could not read it herself. One likes to think of someone reading it to her, slowly, twice. She served on through the rest of that hard war, nursing, scouting, cooking, and when it was over, she came home to Auburn, to the White House and the apple trees, having been paid, for all of it, almost nothing. The government that had trusted her with soldiers' lives balked for decades at the pension rolls. We will see that little meanness, at very long last, partly mended. The rest of her life, and there was nearly half a century of it, was spent giving things away. The house on South Street filled and stayed full. Her parents, until they died old and free under her roof, brothers and their families, boarders who could pay and lodgers who never could, the sick, the stranded, the simply worn out. To feed them all, she farmed her 7 acres and sold apples and eggs and vegetables door to door in Auburn, and the housewives of the town learned to keep her at the kitchen table an extra half hour, because the vegetable woman with the scar on her head had, when she chose to tell them, the best stories in the state of New York, every one of them true. Help came in odd, warm shapes. A neighbor, Sarah Bradford, a school teacher with a brisk pen, wrote her story out as a little book, the town's great men vouching for every chapter, and the proceeds, some $1,200, steadied the farm at a stroke. In 1869, she married again, a tall, quiet young veteran of the black regiments named Nelson Davis, a bricklayer more than 20 years her junior. The marriage was calm and kindly and lasted nearly 20 years, until his death. In 1874, they adopted a baby girl and named her Gertie, and the conductor of the Underground Railroad spent her 50s rocking a cradle of her own in her own house under nobody's orders at all. Honors arrived slowly in her old age, and she received them with amusement. She went to the suffrage meetings when they asked her, sitting on the platform beside Susan B. Anthony, a small, straight-backed old woman the whole hall rose to see. Asked once whether she truly believed women should vote, she answered that she had suffered enough to believe it. And at gatherings like those, she would say the sentence that serves as this story's seal. She had been a conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and she could say what most conductors could not, that she never ran her train off the track, and she never lost a passenger. From across the ocean, the story goes, came a parcel from Queen Victoria herself, who had been sent Bradford's little book, a silver medal, and a fine soft shawl, which Harriet kept for best, and which rests now in a museum in Washington. The pension came at last too, grudging and small, a widow's $8 a month, raised by a special act of Congress in 1899-20 in recognition of her service as a nurse. Washington had taken 30 years to pay 100th of its debt to the best scout it ever had. She took the $20 and spent it, as she spent everything, mostly on other people. The old wound itself was quieted in the end. The weight from Bucktown had ached and buzzed in her head for 60 years, and late in the 1890s, in Boston, she let surgeons ease the pressure of the old injury. Offered ether, she declined it. She had seen soldiers in the war bear the knife with a bullet held in their teeth, she explained, and reckoned that what they could do, she could do. So she lay still and quiet on the table, an old woman biting gently on a bullet, and let the doctors work, and afterward she said, with satisfaction, that her head felt a good deal better. The doctors of Boston, one imagines, spoke of her at dinner for the rest of their lives. And then, in her middle 70s, she did the last great audacious thing. 25 acres beside her farm came up for auction, and she wanted them, not for herself, but for a dream she had carried for years, a proper home where old and penniless black men and women could be cared for in dignity to the end. She went to the auction and bid, and kept bidding, an old woman with almost nothing in her purse, until the land was knocked down to her at $1,450. Asked how she proposed to pay, she answered, in effect, that she was going home to tell the Lord about it and let him see to the balance. The Lord, on this occasion, worked through a mortgage from a sympathetic bank and the deep pockets of her church, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion, to which she deeded the whole of it on the promise the dream be built. And in 1908, when she was about 86, the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged opened its doors on the land she had bought with faith and nothing else. She had begun her free life saving coins from a hotel kitchen to buy other people's freedom. She ended it, giving away her last field so that other people could die warm. The bookends of that shelf match exactly. She grew very old, in the house and then in the home, outliving her century, and nearly everyone in this story. The brothers she had carried out, the conductors and station masters, the senator, the colonel, the old Quaker who bought her shoes, the queen who sent her a shawl. In her last years, when her strength was gone, she moved into the home for the aged herself, the one she had bought the land for and given away. She had, without ever planning it for herself, prepared her own last room. She died there on the 10th of March, 1913, of pneumonia, in her 91st year or thereabouts, the records of enslaved birth being what they were. It was, by every account, the death this whole story has been promising you. A warm bed, no hurry, and the room full of the people who loved her, family and old friends, and the ministers of her church. There were prayers, and there was singing, the old songs, the ones that had once carried whole families across 100 miles of dark. And she, who had led every chorus of her life, joined in from the pillow where she could, and near the end she gave them, calm as a conductor, announcing the last station, her final instruction, in words from the Gospel of John, I go away to prepare a place for you. They buried her with honors, a flag on her coffin, an old soldier standing by under the tall trees of Fort Hill Cemetery in Auburn. A year later, the city unveiled a bronze tablet in her memory at the courthouse, and one of the most famous men in America came to speak of her. And above that little northern city, that night and every clear night since, precisely where it has always been, stood the North Star, which does not wander, does not set, and does not lie. So, let the story settle now, the way supper settles, the way a farmhouse settles at night, beam by beam, into the warm dark. A midwife's fee and a ledger, in the marsh country of Maryland. A girl called Minty wading the silver marshes in winter. A mother standing in a doorway, refusing to move, and a little brother who never went south. A thrown iron weight, a bench by the loom, and out of that darkness, for the rest of one long life, dreams that told true. A father's lessons in a pine wood, the moss on the north side, the quiet step, the two stars at the lip of the drinking gourd, pointing always at the one star that never moves. $5 paid to a lawyer for the truth. A hymn sung softly past a cabin door at dusk, bound for the promised land, and a woman walking north alone under the only lamp nobody could confiscate. 90 miles of nights, two hands examined in a golden sunrise to see if freedom had changed them. A ledger in Philadelphia, filling quietly with names. A log canoe crossing the December bay behind one small lantern. Chickens loosed flapping in a dusty road, and a book held open, perhaps upside down, in a railway carriage. Songs at cabin doors, pitched to mean tonight, or wait. A Quaker merchant counting out new shoes. Christmas rain on a Fodder house roof. A mother watching the road. A father saying goodbye, blindfolded so that every word he spoke afterward would be true. An old horse and a homemade cart, walking two old people to freedom at 3 miles an hour. A White House and apple trees, bought from a senator who slept just fine. Pies and root beer in an army camp. Two little steamers gliding up a black river past the sunken mines, and at dawn, 700 people coming down through the rice fields to the boats, kettles still steaming, and a voice on the deck singing them calm. A silver medal from a queen, a bullet held gently in the teeth, and a lifetime's ache gone quiet. An auction won with an empty purse and a full conviction. A last field given away so that strangers could die warm. And at the end of all of it, in Auburn, in the spring of 1913, a warm bed, a room full of singing, and an old conductor announcing, without one flicker of doubt, the last station on the line. A place prepared. She never lost a passenger. Not on the marsh roads, not on the river, not in the war, not in 90 years. And tonight, for this hour before sleep, you have been won, and the record, you will notice, still holds. Your own day is done too. Whatever it held, it is held now. You do not have to carry it another step tonight. The fire here is low and easy. The crickets are keeping the hours. The dark outside your window is the same dark she trusted with everything. The dark that kept 10 years of secrets and never told one. And somewhere above the roof, behind whatever weather there is, the North Star is standing exactly where her father said it would be, patient as a lighthouse, keeping the one appointment it has always kept. There is no road under your feet tonight. The house is quiet, the door is fast, and the night, her good friend the night, has the watch. Sleep now. Good night. History will keep till morning.